One of the intentions of Project 2025 is to devolve power to the states where Republicans control more than half of state legislatures and or governorships, or they have split power with a little bit of a tilt towards them. And this intention has been a very long-term goal because most of the federal laws that they are attacking are designed to prohibit discrimination, which can then proliferate if there's no one stopping them. Beginning with discrimination in how elections are handled. Because as our students of voter suppression know, states basically control the mechanisms of democracy, particularly given the erosion of the Voting Rights Act. But who leads our state's three branches of government will impact many other issues in the coming years. With that in mind, I want to turn to one of the most crucial elections of 2025, the Wisconsin Supreme Court race. The winner of that race will hold the swing vote in future 4-3 decisions, shaping the state's legal landscape for years to come. Our next guest is working to mobilize voters through his organization, Power to the Polls, to turn out for the Democrats. Former Lieutenant Governor Mandela Barnes, welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you so much. Really glad to be able to have a conversation with you once again.
Well, I appreciate you being here. As you know, we're just a few days away from one of the most consequential elections of 2025. I mean, technically it happens what date?
April 1st.
There you
it's
go.
Right around the corner.
And this is a battle for an open seat on the Wisconsin Supreme Court. Judge Susan Crawford is facing off against Brad Schimmel, a far-right politician who is bankrolled by none other than Elon Musk and other deep-pocketed conservative special interest groups. Mandela, can you walk us through what's at stake in this race?
So everything is at stake with this race. 2 years ago, we took the majority in the state Supreme Court for the first time. Some people say 15 years, but it's sort of hard to determine actually where things were. 15 years ago, our politics were completely different. We weren't dealing with the level of extremes that we're dealing with now. Every election, wasn't the most consequential end-all, be-all election for the Supreme Court as these races are turning out to be. And there are two things at stake. One is the future of the country. Two, specifically and very selfishly, the state of Wisconsin. I say the future of this country because Elon Musk put in $250 million into the presidential race. And you see the level of influence that he has on our institutions and effectively on the way of life for so many people in this country. An unelected, oligarch who has been able to step in and wreak havoc. And so at this point, I want to say he's up to about $13 to $15 million being spent in this state Supreme Court race, which is a wild amount of money. This already surpassed any level of spending historically for a Wisconsin Supreme Court race. And 2 years ago, we blew past the record, and now that record is way in the rear view. Now, with that being said, Elon Musk does have a case in front of the Supreme Court with Tesla. That is one thing. And for anybody to suggest or think that, maybe he'll sit this one out and won't be corrupt in this instance, well, let's just give it a try, is completely fooling themselves. And for Wisconsin to continue to have impartial courts, and when I say the majority, I've said it before, and I will say it again, there is a fallacy of nonpartisan courts, especially in this day and age. But in order to do the right things that people are looking for, the nonpartisan things like fair maps and even woman's right to choose, which is overwhelmingly supported by people regardless of party, it is going to take a court that understands fairness is not going to lead with a partisan lens. Unfortunately, we have seen so many instances over the course of time, during my time in the state legislature, during my time as lieutenant governor, where the court made the political calculation instead of the calculation that was best for the people of Wisconsin. We just got fairer maps, and now for the first time, the legislature is more reflective of the state of Wisconsin, and we can lose all of that progress. And when I say we, I don't mean Democrats, I don't even mean progressives. I mean people here in the state of Wisconsin who just want some fairness and want things to work.
So you and I met when you were in the state legislature, as was I, and then we worked together when you were lieutenant governor. And I think it's important for us to contextualize why, in a moment where all of the attention is focused on the national concerns, why it is so critical that we not ignore what is happening at the state level. So one thing you mentioned was Elon Musk is investing heavily in the Supreme Court race because he's got a case in front of the Wisconsin Supreme Court. We know he also has a case in front of the Delaware Supreme Court. We are watching this intentional infusion of capital into not just the attempt to change the outcome, but a very direct and naked attempt to influence the rule of law. Can you talk a bit from the position of having been a lawmaker and then someone responsible for enforcing the laws on the administrative side, the executive side, and now someone who is working to protect the courts? Can you talk just a little bit about why the states are such an important barometer of what's happening in this country?
Oh, for sure. You even touched on it in the beginning when you talked about Project 25 and delegating so many of the tasks to the states, be it state legislatures or the governors. Now, if it can happen in Wisconsin, it can happen anywhere, and it has absolutely been evidenced that if the things that happen here in Wisconsin tend to have a ripple effect nationwide. We've been really good at a lot of amazing things in this state. I always remind people about us being the first state to ratify the 19th Amendment. Wisconsin was the first state to declare the Fugitive Slave Act unconstitutional. Wisconsin was the first state to have anti-discrimination laws based on sexual orientation or ability on the books. We've done incredibly bold things, but we've also outsourced a lot of our bad policies. And I truly believe that, if we didn't have to experience Scott Walker for 8 years in Wisconsin, Donald Trump wouldn't have been president. Scott Walker showed up with an audacity like no other, showed up as a person who is completely focused on himself. And
Can you explain who Scott Walker is?
I am so sorry, and I'm glad people have likely forgotten who he is. Scott Walker was the former governor of Wisconsin, got elected in 2010. As soon as he got into office, the first steps that he took were to dismantle public sector unions by taking away collective bargaining rights, and also made the most significant, substantial cut to public education in the nation's history up until that point. Also subscribe to the politics of division. And that is what gave wind to the sails of people like Donald Trump. If we continue down this path where the most wealthy person in the entire world is able to continue to buy elections, we are going to be in trouble, and we're all going to be in a position that we don't want to be in, where we have to subscribe to the politics of this one man as a country, because we see what is happening to people who want to stand up. That's something I believe in more than anything else, as I know you do as well. My organization, Power to the Polls, we're out mobilizing people, especially the folks who are not likely to show up in a spring election right after a presidential. The people who aren't getting all the information, the people who haven't been in constant communication with campaigns or political parties, and we're equipping them with the information. And I can tell you, for folks who weren't necessarily even aware that there was a Supreme Court race coming up, when we mentioned the influence of Elon Musk and Donald Trump, minds changed. People's ears perked up, they start to listen, and they were ready, or have become ready, to make a plan to vote and to get other people to vote as well.
So, as someone who's on the ground talking to voters, we know that the specter of Elon Musk, the horrific outcomes in just 2 months of a Trump presidency 2.0, is having a galvanizing effect on voters. What other issues are driving people to the polls? What are you hearing on the ground?
Well, for sure, abortion still remains a critical issue. Wisconsin has an 1849 criminal abortion ban, and the way that we bring our laws up to current status, which truly reflects the will of the people, is having a court that actually respects the will of the people. And so I would say, abortion is still a very important issue, and also the topic, the cause of fair maps. People want to be truly represented, and people had not been represented since at least 2011. And our maps still aren't perfect right now. They still aren't perfectly fair. They're just a lot better than they were since 2011. And it's made an immediate impact on electoral outcomes. It's also seeming to have some sort of an impact with those folks who now have to think about, going to face an electorate that is not going to automatically just show up and vote for them just because of party affiliation. We've seen people at least have more bipartisan chatter, and that we've always had bipartisan chatter from our side, but now you're hearing it a little bit more from Republicans. So the fair maps, the right to choose, and also the right to collectively bargain. That is, we can talk about jobs being created. We can talk about good jobs, but good jobs don't just happen. Good jobs are here in our communities, regardless of what state you're in, because of the strides that were made by organized labor, whether it's the 40-hour work week or whether it's even establishment of a minimum wage. We used to have a $7.25 minimum wage in Wisconsin, which is ridiculous. But the fact is, if there aren't unions to push the needle, if people can't make their opinions heard in the workplace without fear of unfair retaliation, then the jobs that will get created aren't necessarily going to be good jobs, because we'll see employers, we'll see supervisors continue to take advantage of the workforce. I mean, it still happens right now. And that's why organized labor, that's why unions are seeing some of the broadest support that they've ever seen historically.
So what are some of the activities? We have a lot of conversation on this show about what do you do? So not just what's the problem, why is it a problem, and then how do you solve it? So Power to the Polls has been doing extraordinary work. I had the privilege of working with you over the last few years as a point of privilege. I was actually born in Madison, only lived there for 3 years, but yeah, I get a little bit of a tie to Wisconsin. But Power to the Polls has been very influential in mobilizing this broad cross-section of Wisconsinites. What are you all doing in particular? And if anyone's listening, what can they do to help mobilize more Wisconsin voters to turn out to the polls?
And thank you so much for highlighting the organization. And I think that you set a really good example of what base building looks like. I think that you set an example of what talking to people that other people are not talking to how that should be conducted. And it has to happen in a real way. And we're not just showing up to people's doorsteps 30 to 60 days before an election. We engage in year-round, on-the-ground, constant contact community organizing. We're there when there is no ballot even processed, because that's when people are willing to listen. And it also gives us time to follow up and have thorough engagement. It gives us time to answer questions. It gives people a time to even digest that information. When you're showing up, when an election on the horizon, people are already inundated with all sorts of political communications. It's hard to discern what's real and what's not. When you show up earlier, it gives people time to, one, do their own research, but we also give them a way to follow up with us, and we do take it upon ourselves to follow up with them. And so in the lead up to elections, 1 year plus out, we are showing up in communities, we're talking to people. We're also hosting different events that are, nominally political, but not always so much, because people want to be able to, congregate or be in a space where they can speak freely without feel like they're talking to a salesperson trying to get them to vote for someone. And on top of the door knocking, which obviously has to happen, we do radio, we do digital and streaming services, we do targeted mail. And our effort is to just be in touch with people in as many points throughout the day as we possibly can, in as many different ways, wherever they're receiving information. We want Power to the Polls to be there. And the most important part of our work is letting people know that the election is just step one. Going to vote for somebody is the first step. We also want to help them and be there to support them in ways when they have grievances that need to be aired, or they have an issue that needs to be brought up. And knowing that the only way we not just win elections, but also get real results out of government is when people come together.
So you talked about the working class vote and how important that is because of the fragility of labor unions in Wisconsin and how important this court can be to protecting and defending those rights. We also know that there's been a larger conversation post-election about communities of color. And we have seen an aggressive attack by this administration on Black and brown voters, especially and specifically. How are you processing this tension that's happening in our public narrative? You're in the first election since we've been in this broader conversation about who do we talk to. And I think you've alluded to it, but I want you to be really specific about why it matters that we reach out to and not jettison any one community, that we have to have this broader conversation, but also this targeted mobilization.
For sure, and the working class voters is the most important voting bloc, because these are folks who have been taken advantage of consistently, people who've been asked for their vote but haven't necessarily been handed the results that people should be immediately witnessing and experiencing. I mean, not immediately, but at least at some point. And with that being the case, this is why we have seen a consistent drop off in black voter turnout in Wisconsin, specifically, and other states across the country as well, since 2012. And this is because people feel as if there's no party who's looking out for them. There's no party that is willing to listen. There's no party that's willing to take the time outside of election cycles. And people are quite frankly over it, because quality of life has declined for so many working class people, while at the same time, the most wealthy and most powerful in our society has seen wealth and power continue to accumulate. And so we talk to folks who don't have regular voting history. We talk to those high opportunity voters. I tell people we're operating in the HOV lane all year long, because when people can at least have a conversation and have their questions answered and feel as if there's somebody who is willing to listen, or at least be able to guide them or point them in the right direction and show them that government can function, but government can only function well when people are able to show up and talk about the things that matter, and be able to be in touch with their representatives, and to be able to have an outlet that's not just a social media post about things that are going wrong, where you have this direct line. For too many people, politics just feels so abstract. It feels as if the governing bodies and institutions are intangible. It feels as if there's no way or no mechanism for redress. And that is something that we work to let them know. And so the people who don't have the regular voting history, those are the folks that we're going to continue to talk to. But also, sometimes you knock on a door and a person won't even be on the voter file. And, we talk to them too. We don't just walk away if the person who we're looking for isn't home. And we've been able to add tens of thousands of people to the voter rolls that are now in our contact list, that are now in our database, that we keep up regular communication with, so that they can go from a person who was not ever going to be communicated with. Now these people have an opportunity to become regular voters, frequent voters. These are not just people who feel like they've been asked to go vote. They're people who feel like they've been asked to be a part of the process. And that's the biggest difference.
That is exactly what I wanted to hear. Mandela, what's your last call to action for our audience? They will do what they can. We've got a race coming up on April 1st, but what do you want them to do now, and what do you want them to do the day after the race is over?
So I want, for sure, people to support the work of Power to the Polls. The first step is the election. We got a long runway to the midterm. And actually, on the way to the midterm, we still have another Supreme Court race in exactly 1 year from next week. So please stay involved, stay engaged with our work. Don't forget about Wisconsin. Things are back and forth all the time. But the harder we work, the more we have a chance to firmly plant Wisconsin in its rightful place. And that's a place of progress.
And if our listeners want to learn more about Judge Crawford, where do they go?
Yep, they can go to her website, which is Crawford, CRAWFORD, 4WI.com. Crawford4WI.com.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.